David Brewster here with another episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Dokken. And I've definitely been a Dokken and George Lynch fan since I was in high school. And for whatever reason, as soon as I heard their music, it just grabbed my attention. And I couldn't help but wonder like, who's that guitar player, and what chord is that, and do you hear that solo? And that's awesome. And I just became a fan, just from hearing it. And honestly, my sister, who's a few years older than me, but she's definitely, she was a Dokken fan back in the day, and of course, hearing those sounds and watching some of the videos and stuff with her, I kind of became interested in Lynch, and I was like, man, I really like his guitar playing. And really, if you look back at that time, like in the '80s and all the hair metal stuff, most of it was real bubblegum and kind of radio friendly and happy, parties and sunshine and stuff like that. And then when you heard Dawkins' music, it was dark, and you heard all these like, sinister sounds and flat fives and, really, exotic scales and all this different stuff. So George always came out, kind of twisted, and, there's a lot of aggression and, dark sounds in their music. And I immediately picked up on that. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. And it was a contrast to a lot of the kind of bright and friendly, hair metal that was around at that time. Like listen to someone like Bon Jovi and then listen to Dokken, and they sound completely different. Dokken's really dark and ominous, usually. And, like a band like Bon Jovi's really light and kind of, airy. So it was, really noticeable at the time. So I have seen Dokken in concert, and I went to that show with my sister actually, and I'm gonna save that for a different episode of Chordplay. But I will share a story of going to a George Lynch guitar clinic with a student of mine, Troy Pence. I was teaching Troy when I lived down in Evansville, and he's a big George Lynch fan. And I remember he came into his lesson and he was like, "Do you want to go see George Lynch?" And I was like, "What?" And he told me about this clinic, and we jumped in the car and drove to Illinois, and because Evansville's technically in Indiana, not to get all geographical here, but it was really cool to finally like see him, do a clinic, and it was obviously the focus was on him, and I liked that, and he came out and he played and he talked and he did like a meet and greet, and there were a whole bunch of people there, and I got an autograph, and definitely that was really cool to finally meet him and kind of see him strut his stuff. All right, so this episode's mainly gonna kind of tap into some of his altered chords and weird sounds that he, kind of uncovered in Dawkins' music. And, even if you compare a song like Alone Again, to any other kind of hair metal ballad or 80s, acoustic song or ballad or whatever, it's, has a very, striking contrast to the kind of strummed acoustic love song. It's like, no, as soon as you hear the song, it's really twisted. Right off the bat, you've got that E minor 9, so it has this haunting quality, and we've actually seen that chord in several episodes of chord play. By the way, we're tuned down a half step. Most of this lesson is going to be down a half step. The last two examples are going to go back up to standard, and I'll kind of give you a heads up when we get there. But that chord, we've seen that in Pink Floyd and a whole bunch of music so far. It's a very common sound, especially in rock and metal. You can hear that in classical guitar and flamenco music as well. But right there, that song opens with that chord, and as soon as I heard that, it just bounced off my ear, and I thought, what in the world is that? Because I wasn't used to that tonality and that dark sound, and I think that's beautiful. Very haunting flavor. Definitely a fan of that chord. The next example comes from When Heaven Comes Down, which is from the same album as Alone Again. That's on the Tooth and Nail album, which is an earlier, Dokken release. And even with the, kind of early recording quality, it's not like this high definition, kind of sound. You can tell it's a little dated as far as the studio quality, but it's still a killer album. There's great stuff on there. But this really does showcase George's kind of interest or habit of grabbing dark, twisted intervals. So here we've got an E power chord, And then he flirts with an E flat 5 power chord, like this. And he's kind of just, banging on that low E string and mixing between that E5 and E flat 5. Really cool. All right, the next example is a challenge. This is from Lightning Strikes Again, which is on Under Lock and Key. And there's kind of a little folklore or history behind this riff, because a lot of Lynch fans have talked about the enormous stretch that's involved in this riff. So if nothing else, it's a great stretching exercise. And it kind of loosely reminds me of Steal Away the Night, the Randy Rhoads Chordplay episode that I did. And he was kind of mixing, these double stops with, bass notes. And in this riff from Dokken, George is grabbing an F sharp, and then he's reaching up and grabbing these higher double stops or fourths on the D and G string. So it sounds and looks something like this. And it's a powerful riff, it's crushing. And you can see right there, we're basically moving from like it's loosely like an F sharp minor 7, but he's, kind of just barring with his index finger there. And then he's basically grabbing part of a B power chord with that F sharp root. Then he's grabbing part of a C sharp power chord, and then eventually stretches all the way up to D right there. So that's a big stretch. And you definitely don't want to play around with these kind of, alternate shapes. Just keep it on that set of strings and stretch for it. You really got to reach, for that D. So that's a good, kind of pinky warm up or strength building exercise, for your pinky finger for sure. The next riff is from It's Not Love, which is also from Under Lock and Key. And this is an interesting guitar part with a really cool sequence of chords, and the way he's playing these chords is interesting too. So you can hear other versions of this technique or this approach. Little guitars from Van Halen, and it was like a Damn Yankee song. There's a whole bunch of, kind of 80s, rock stuff where you can hear this kind of finger style, like plucked, pattern. So he's doing this... And I like the fact that he's adding vibrato to those little diads, those little double stops, kind of, he's making the chord move, and I love that sound, It's more interesting than just hearing a stagnant, stationary chord. You actually hear it moving around, which is really cool. It makes it sound alive. And the trick there, really, you're just kind of using your index and middle finger, and you're just kind of plucking, the string instead of picking it, with a pick. So it's really cool. You're just kind of grabbing both strings at the same time. The next example is from Standing in the Shadows, which is from the Back for the Attack album, which honestly I think that's my favorite Dokken album. I do like Under Lock and Key and Tooth and Nail, and then kind of select, songs from other albums too. But Back for the Attack, I think, they had a big budget. It's a very, well-produced album. You can really hear everything. Under Lock and Key has a similar, sound, but Back for the Attack's even bigger, where it's like, oh my gosh. Mr. Scary's on there, and Heaven Sent, a whole bunch of songs. And this one's similar to It's Not Love. It's kind of using a different, sequence of chords, but we're using the same kind of plucked, finger style we were using in It's Not Love. And now we're also in standard tuning too, so we're not tuned down a half step anymore. All right, so this one's actually going to start on a little piece of a D power chord. So it's really just a fourth, it's just an A and a D. So I guess if you want to think of, what chord that is, that's a D5 over A, and then an F over C. And then you're basically flirting with, the flat 5 there, a C flat or a B natural. Technically that would be C flat, even though, most people wouldn't rather think of that as a B. It looks and sounds something like this. And of course there's a bigger kind of head, he's overdubbing those chords, So there's a kind of a bigger stab on that D and that C at the end. So he's really just kind of moving through these fourths, and he also hits a flat 5, basically after the second chord. There's like a little bit of a mutation right there, and then it moves down actually to a B flat 5, and that's a B flat 5, like a B flat power chord. The last song's Dream Warriors from Back for the Attack, and of course this was in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. And, before you say anything bad about Dokken, it's like, well, how many songs have you had in a Nightmare on Elm Street film? How many? Yeah, I've had 0, and I'm guessing you've probably had 0 too. Dokken's had 1 song in a Nightmare on Elm Street film, so I give him props for that. It's like, man, you guys wrote Dream Warriors. That's badass. Big time. So once again, we're kind of flirting with some of the similar shapes that we just saw in It's Not Love and Standing in the Shadows, but we're playing them a little bit differently. So this obviously has that big kind of dreamy intro, pun intended. So that transition from the intro into that kind of rockin' riff looks and sounds something like this. And then he starts doing this. After the intro part and then the rockin' with Dokken part, when the verse starts, then he starts doing clean chords, and there's this A minor add 9 thrown in. And kind of like a D add 11 there a little bit at the end. And I really like that sound too. Very haunting, very spacey sound. I love those chords. Alright, that's going to wrap this look at the Chords of Dokken, and definitely there's a ton of things you can learn from studying George Lynch. He's a legend of rock and shred and hard rock, and he's consistently stayed very active, and he's released solo albums. He's worked with other artists. There's a ton of side projects and other things he's done outside of Dokken. But a lot of these songs and riffs and ideas that he recorded and laid down back in the day have stood the test of time. They're still popular songs, popular riffs, and he's still a very exciting guitar player. All these years later, you can still pick up new ideas and some fresh sounds from someone like him. So definitely give George some respect, and definitely check out some of the music from Dokken. And leave some comments and feedback, and please subscribe to Late Night Lessons. And I'll be back with some more chord play and three for all, and licks and content and lessons before you know it. Thank you.